Hello there, this is Dana Arcuri, author, speaker, survivor, and advocate from DanaArcuri.com. And today's discussion is real, raw, and quite traumatic. This is my personal story. We are going to be talking about the workplace bullies, narcissists, and sexual harassment. Most of you have heard on the news about various forms of workplace bullying and sexual harassment, especially with the Harvey Weinstein case, which came to light this year in 2020. We also may have been aware of other instances with other big sex scandals that went viral, and one of them was with the Gretchen Carlson, who had a workplace situation that was ongoing, and she ended up disclosing her sexual harassment at Fox News. If you'd like to watch that documentary, I definitely advise you to do so. It is eye-opening. I love Gretchen Carlson. I love that she broke the silence, and she has many different informational videos available in regards to sexual harassment and assaults, especially in the workplace. And while I have told my story in Soul Cry about my sexual assaults and various challenges with child abuse, narcissistic abuse, and so forth with my past history, the one thing that I did not disclose was the workplace situation that I have suffered. And so today I am breaking the silence. I am going to tell the truth about abuse. For privacy matters, we will not be disclosing the names of the businesses nor medical professionals, but I will give full descriptions and explain exactly what took place with me in the early 2000s. And so the one thing I'd like to say, just for people who aren't familiar with me, is that I have over 30 plus years working in the beauty industry. That was my primary passion. At one point, when I was younger, I had decided to go back to school, and I started working in the medical industry. And for about 10 years, I did work in various positions in the medical industry. I have actually been to school more than once for various occupations as a medical professional. And so the primary position that I will be talking about is a surgical technician working mostly in the operating room of some very prestigious hospitals in my area. And so the one thing we have to talk about first before I go into my story is that this is so common. The sexual harassment on the job, the bullying, the narcissistic abuse going on in the places that we are employed. And this makes it really difficult because most of us, number one, we need the money, and that's why we're staying. Number two, we don't understand what's going on. A lot of people aren't really fully educated or aware of sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, on-the-job bullying, and narcissistic abuse. A lot of people are not fully aware of what this entails. I know personally myself, back in the early days of the early 2000s, now we're talking 20 years ago, people, I did not hear of narcissistic abuse. I never was familiar with the word, what it meant. I knew that there were people who would bully me or others in the workplace, but I didn't understand the full dynamics of discrimination and especially the sexual harassment. So that was something that really we didn't hear about back in early 2000s. There wasn't a lot of talk. Back in the early 2000s, Me Too, the whole Me Too movement, it did not exist that early and that year. So we've really come a long way. It was really basically after 2017 when the Harvey Weinstein case went viral, especially on Twitter, that the Me Too movement kind of lit fire, and it just grew and grew like wildfire. And now a lot of people are coming forth to share their stories. And so today I'm going to be talking about my true story involving bullying in the workforce, narcissistic abuse, and sexual harassment on the job. So let's go back to some workplace bullying examples first, because this may be something that you could relate to. Perhaps you are being bullied on the job, or you have in the past. So let's first discuss the bullying so you could really understand and grasp what this means. We're going to set the picture so you could envision what this may look like and then possibly identify with it. So here are some examples of workplace bullying. You may be targeted for practical jokes. People could play pranks on you at work. It's typically not funny. Number two, being purposefully misled at work. So it could be that a coworker, a boss, or someone, maybe even of authority, is misleading you in your job description, your job duties. Maybe they're giving you incorrect deadlines and dates and even job descriptions and information that could actually cause you harm. Next is there might be threats, public humiliation and embarrassment, and verbal abuse at your place of employment. Denial among coworkers and supervisors is so common. A lot of times when we report abuse or any kind of bullying at work, the people who are the predators and the abusers and the narcs will deny it. They'll say, we're just imagining it. Oh, they need to get thick or thin. Oh, they're just so sensitive. Oh, they just don't have a good sense of humor. Next is that bullies will use intimidation on the job. So there's social exclusion. You won't be invited to sit next to them in the lunchroom at work. They'll be spying on you, spreading rumors about you, and invading your privacy. Next is retaliation. If you do report the toxic abusers, such as the narcissist or anyone who is sexually harassing you, beware. They will retaliate. And what this means is they're going to punish you for telling the truth about abuse. They are going to come after you with a vengeance. And this is exactly why many employees keep silent for years and years, sometimes an entire lifetime, about what took place at their workplace, because they don't want to be retaliated against. They don't want smear campaigns against them. They don't want their professional reputation destroyed, because this is what abusers do. We see it all the time. I mean, even when I was watching the Gretchen Carlson documentary about Fox News, it was very, very clear how the different predators and different people who are toxic were using various forms of smear campaigns, gossiping, rumors, discrediting the victims of this sexual harassment on the job. And so it's very common that they will try to minimize it. They will try to push it under the carpet and say that you're crazy. And lastly, your boss, if they happen to be the narcissist or the person who's sexually harassing you and bullying you, they won't promote you. They may have in the past promised you a promotion or extra training or maybe a raise or getting a little time off with pay. They may have had something that they had promised you in the past, but after everything comes to light, or if you report them, you could guarantee you'll never, ever get the raise. You'll never get the promotion, and you can expect demotion. Okay, let's move forward now. I have my notes. I'm going to share now my own story. And remember, this is based on my own personal experience. So it's in the early 2000s when I had an awesome opportunity to work for a very prestigious trauma hospital in my area as a surgical technician in the operating room. And while the position is intimidating in a way, because think about it. I was hired to assist the surgeons with surgery. Now, this is really big. This is a huge responsibility. It's already a very stressful situation. It's physically demanding, mentally taxing and exhausting, and yet it was stimulating and exhilarating to be in this position, working side by side with all these doctors and nurses and various medical staff. it was exciting to enter into this position, and I had high hopes for it. But what happened was, during this position as a surgical technician, and keep in mind, I rotated in various forms of surgery. So there was general surgery, there was cosmetic surgery, orthopedic surgery, spine, maxillofacial, gynecological. There were so many other forms, ENT, urological. I was involved with most surgeries other than heart surgery. I was involved in trauma surgery. I mean, we're talking full-blown trauma patients, quite graphic and gory. And it was a very, very interesting, challenging, and yet rewarding position. Let's move forward. So in this first position at this hospital, when I'm a surgical technician and I'm working side by side with doctors, nurses, and other medical staff, within a few short months of being in this full-time position, I started experiencing workplace bullying and harassment. I personally could see that the surgeons were like Jekyll and Hyde. In just a regular office environment, or if you walk past them in the hall, they might be friendly and say hello. But when you're alone with them or side by side with them in the operating room, they suddenly were like this Jekyll and Hyde, where suddenly they're this vicious, hostile, aggressive, highly narcissistic person who's malicious, screaming, yelling. I mean, we're talking, they would have full-blown temper tantrums like a toddler. I am talking throwing their tools and their equipment across the operating room. It was sometimes quite a abusive situation in which most people were speechless. We didn't really talk about it. So the one thing going on is, when you're seeing this abuse happening, or you're observing it, you're observing the doctor freaking out, flipping out, swearing, screaming, throwing his tools across the operating room, most of us didn't say anything. We're quiet, we're professional, and it's a situation that's it's very uncomfortable. What do? You do nothing. You do nothing. At least in the beginning, you do nothing. Next is that I started experiencing that there were surgical technicians who had been in this hospital and in this operating room for 20, 30 years or even beyond. Okay, so picture these more mature adults. Okay, so they were not some young chicken. No. These people who I worked with, who were surgical technicians, who had been at this hospital much, much longer than me, were a lot older. Most were in their 50s, 60s. Plenty of them were ready for retirement. And here's the situation. They were protective, like overprotective about their position. They didn't like us new people. And mind you, when I was hired, there was at least 29 other people hired. So back in the early 2000s, when I was brought on board to this OR position, I was not the only one. They did extensive interviewing. There was over 300 applicants. I was one of the 30 people hired as a surgical technician for this operating room. So, that's when I say it's an honor, and it was humbling, and it was exciting. You can understand when you get chosen over 300 other applicants, that's a big deal. Yes, it's an honor. However, I soon found out that the workplace was not safe. It was not comfortable. It was very uncomfortable. It became clear that these surgical technicians were extremely envious and jealous of this new group of 30 brand new young surgical technicians who were hired. They were so threatened by us that they became bullies and would daily harass us. I am talking verbal abuse. I am talking they would not just abuse us and try to criticize us in a professional, the whole professional thing where they're trying to put us down as surgical technicians, saying, you don't know enough and you don't know anything and I don't know how you got this job and you are not fit for this position. You don't know what you're doing. You need to get your act together. And they would say really cruel things to us, very hurtful. But they would also attack us, our personhood, who we were as a human being. They would attack us. They would belittle us. They would shame us. And they would ostracize us throughout the operating room. And so the 30 of us new surgical technicians would meet at different times, and sometimes we'd sit together at lunch, or we would chat maybe on our way going back to our car when we were leaving the hospital, when we were going home, and we'd talk and we'd share what was going on. And I soon found out that I was not the only target, that they were actually bullying all of us. It wasn't just me. So it wasn't like an isolated case, which in a way, this makes it even worse, because now there's 30 of us being bullied on the job in the operating room. Next is that from there, it became more hostile. So it was an environment in which it was so extremely negative. There was so much oppression on the job that I didn't want to go to work. I didn't like my job anymore. I'll be honest, I didn't get paid well. I was a little bit taken back at how low this hospital, I'm not going to give names, but they are the #1 hospital in my area. They have a lot of extremely, very advanced progressive medicine and procedures and surgeries happening here. People come from all over the world to this state, to this hospital, and yet they paid us very inferior. We didn't get paid and compensated for what we're worth, for our talent, for our education, for our knowledge, for the stress, for what we're doing. We're working side by side with the surgeons. We are assisting with surgery, and yet our pay was worse and lower than someone who works at a grocery store. So people who work at a grocery store, their salary, they were paid more than us. Think about it. You don't have to have a whole lot of skills to work at a grocery store other than knowing math. In this day and age, you don't even really need to know math, because a lot of it is already rung up and it's all computerized, and you don't have to have a college education. And yet we weren't getting paid as well as people who worked at a grocery store, and we're being bullied and we're being harassed. So it really escalated. So I'm going to bring you to the turning point, like the breaking point of this particular hospital and why I left. So it was a situation where there was several people, and they were the older women who were bullying me, who were every single day just harassing, yelling, screaming. I am talking the hostility, the viciousness, the maliciousness, extremely unhealthy. I was a shipwreck. I had never dealt with anything to this extent at work. Now, of course, for those who know me, hey, I already survived child abuse. I already survived child neglect, narcissistic abuse, sexual assault, statutory rape. Hey, I've been through the ringer, but I never experienced this extent of abuse at work. It took me by surprise because it was a prestigious hospital. You wouldn't have thought ever that such a thing could happen, especially in an operating room. Okay, so here's the breaking point. One day, I am in the operating room with this one particular individual who is a surgical technician, much older woman, extremely hostile, mouthy, arrogant, nasty, mean-spirited person. And she literally physically assaulted me. Number one, when you're in an operating room, it's called sterile technique. Everybody is gloved. Everybody has a mask on. We have everything. We're suited up for surgery. As a surgical technician, my job is to keep a sterile environment. I am to protect the patient in that environment, especially their surgical site. And yet, this woman who was working next to me, the surgical tech, walked in front of me with her gloved hands, physically grabbed me and violently attacked me, physically assaulted me right there in the middle of surgery. We're talking major surgery. Immediately, I stepped back. I was shocked, stepped back, put my hands up, because that's what you do in the operating room when you're in a sterile technique and you are leaving the OR. I stuck my hands up and I said, I am not putting up with this and I am reporting you. And I left. I marched out of that OR. I marched into the supervisor of the entire OR. So the person who was in charge of the entire operating room, he oversaw everything. He was the highest rank. I went to him. I filed a complaint. The verbal abuse, the bullying, the physical assault, and sadly, it didn't matter. I learned very fast that it didn't matter if you report abuse at the work front. It didn't matter if you tell the truth about abuse, including physical assault. I was not helped. There was no resolution in sight. And after several months of this continuing and escalating to a boiling point, I finally know that there was no going back to this job that was volatile, that was so unhealthy for me. Can you imagine what I was going through physically, mentally? It was extremely toxic. And so one of the women who had worked with me, who had already talked to me about being bullied. So she had been bullied, she had been harassed, and she reached her breaking point before I did. She left. She took a job with another hospital. She gets in touch with me, gets on the phone with me. Hey, I got a new job. This is where it's at. They're hiring. Come on over to this new hospital. So I apply to the hospital for their OR. So this is hospital number 2. I go to the hospital and apply, and they are thrilled. They are thrilled to have me. They are delighted for my experience, for my education, for what I'm bringing to this new hospital. And there were actually 2 different departments that wanted me. So the endoscopy unit said they wanted me. They said, we could train you to work for endoscopy. We know you're a surgical tech, but hey, we're going to offer you the same salary, lots more money than what you were paid before, and we really want you on board on our team. Well, the nurse who was she headed up the OR, so she was the charge nurse of the OR at this second hospital, said, no, we want her. And it was kind of interesting. I mean, it was kind of like, in a way, wow, I can't believe they're both kind of, in a way, like fighting over me. Like they really want me. So it was quite an honor. And I started working, and I decided to stick with the operating room because I had already been in an operating room and that's what I was trained for. I decided that's where I would start. But I told endoscopy I would think about it for the future. And nevertheless, I started working in the OR when very shortly after I observed a lot of sexual harassment, bullying, and narcissistic abuse. And it really took me by surprise. The sexual harassment was worse at this job than the first hospital. I could not believe the cruelty, the profanity, the graphic descriptions that these male surgical technicians would harass various female surgical technicians. It would happen a lot during our lunch breaks. So a lot was going on during the lunch breaks. I sat there quietly. I was speechless, absolutely speechless. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, here we go again. You've got to be kidding me. I kept a low profile. I tried to do my job. I tried to focus on my job. I tried to think positive, pray my way through this. But what happened was I became the target for sexual harassment, bullying, and narcissistic abuse. It started off where these particular 2 specific male surgical technicians, the ones who were already abusing several female surgical technicians, started saying really horrible things to me. It became extremely explicit, graphic, sexual innuendos. They got to the point where through the weeks, through the months, through my time being there, they started going into full-blown descriptions of what they wanted to do with me sexually. At this point, I'm just sickened by it. I mean, number one, I'm married. Number two, I don't need this. I already went through hell and back at the other hospital. I surely don't need this on this job. I was being paid a lot more. I had far better health benefits. I had free parking. I had to look at the pros and cons. I was not sure how to handle this because I never experienced to this extent sexual harassment on the job, especially in a hospital. Let me move forward in my notes. The one thing, again, I need to bring up is during the early 2000s, when all of this was taking place, we didn't understand sexual assaults and sexual abuse and sexual discrimination and sexual harassment the way we do today in 2020. Things were not this way 20 years ago. Early in the 20s, it was something people don't really talk about. We didn't really talk about it. We would see it, we would observe it, we would experience it, but nobody really talked about it. I didn't know how to handle it. Next, we have to understand that, when you are being sexually harassed and when there's these narcissists, and a lot of the narcissists were doctors, the hospital puts them on a high pedestal. They are treated as royalty. Let's take a step back and really think about this. If someone, say myself, a surgical technician, is either A, verbally abused, sexually harassed, or even sexually assaulted, who will the hospital believe? Will they believe the doctor who has all these wonderful credentials, years and years of experience, and this doctor may have been at the hospital for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, okay? He has this wonderful reputation, and yet, he's getting away with sexually harassing and abusing people, especially nurses and surgical technicians in the operating room. So who's the hospital going to believe? They're not going to believe you. If you are someone such as the nurse, the x-ray technician, someone doing sonogram, if you are the surgical technician, if you are someone else, maybe you are a receptionist, maybe you are a phlebotomist, maybe you are a medical assistant, maybe you have some other position, whether it's clerical or it's clinical, but you work in a hospital or medical establishment, they're not going to believe you. They're going to take the side of the surgeons, and that's just the way it is. And so we must understand why people don't report bullying, narcissistic abuse, and any form of sexual harassment and violence in medical establishments. This is an epidemic. This is not something new. I am not the only one who has experienced it. Okay, so what happened was I had another breaking point. I was in the operating room. Oh, dear Lord. I'm in the operating room assisting with surgery when the surgeon, I'm just being honest here. I really sincerely questioned if they were on cocaine. Their behavior was so erratic. They were speeding. They were flying high. There were so many red flags flaring everywhere. They were radical. They were unprofessional. And this particular surgeon sliced and diced me in the operating room during surgery. So my these two fingers were sliced, literally a slice straight through both. My gloves are filling up with blood fast. I lift my hands again, step back from the surgery site and say, I am cut. You have cut me. I am bleeding. May I please leave the operating room? And I was told, no, you may not. So there I am. They're forcing me to continue assisting with surgery, although I'm bleeding now and my glove is filled up with blood. Okay, whoa, serious situation going on here. So I'm getting upset because 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed. I'm really upset. My gloves are bloody, okay? I need to get out of there. I step back again and I say, I'm going to wash my hands. I don't care. At this point, I don't care what the doctor says. I don't care what they say. So the nurse comes to my side. She helps me. I wash my hands. She gives me iodine. She's pouring iodine all over my hands. I finally am done. I leave the surgery, immediately go to the head RN, who is the head supervisor of the OR. I go to her, I report what happened, and I said, I want to transfer out immediately. I want to go to the endoscopy unit. I don't want to work in the OR anymore. I'm done. This is it. And she tells me, that's fine. They already wanted you. You know you have a job. You know you have a job. We're just going to transfer you out. But in the meanwhile, you're cut with a bloody knife. So for 6 months, guess what? You have to undergo medical testing to make sure that you don't get any diseases or disorders because of this bloody knife. So for 6 months, I'm on pins and needles being tested for everything under the sun, including AIDS. So many other things, were creeping up that I had to be tested for 6 months to make sure I was okay. Silver lining, I was okay. I survived that. So I transfer out. Now I'm in endoscopy. So I'm thinking to myself, I should be better because I'm in a new unit, because I'm with a new group of people. And what happened was it wasn't a whole lot better. So there was sexual harassment going on in the endoscopy unit too. I observed nurses and surgical technicians being sexually harassed, verbally abused. I saw doctors making all kind of sexual innuendos and literally physically touching the nurses and different people. On one occasion when I was assisting the gastrointestinal physician with a colonoscopy, he physically assaulted, sexually assaulted the female patient who was unconscious. So she already was anesthetized, was not even awake, and he violated her. So I saw this, extremely upset with this. I verbally told him to stop. I warned him. I told him, you cannot continue this. Focus on your job. Stop touching the patient inappropriately. And I was beside myself, just beside myself, because this nightmare continued on. And it became very clear after working at this hospital for 1.5 years, and now I'm in endoscopy, it's very clear that the medical environment is extremely toxic. Here it is, 2 different hospitals. I mean, what are the odds? What are the odds, people, that 2 different hospitals that aren't even near each other, totally different hospitals, the owners are totally different. So they're not owned by the same people. They're 2 totally different establishments in the medical community. What are the odds that there's so much bullying, narcissistic abuse, sexual harassment, and assaults going on? So the end result is that I decided to leave. I decided to retire from the medical industry, and that is when I did exactly that. I decided to re-enter the beauty industry. I could honestly say, after working in the beauty industry as a licensed hairdresser, esthetician, makeup artist, and I also have much education working with people who have scars, cancer. I do camouflage makeup for many people who have different facial disfigurements. I could say in my 30-some years, I did not experience this kind of sexual harassment, bullying, and abuse that I did in the medical industry. And I mean, how crazy is that? How crazy is that? What goes on behind closed doors of an operating room, of a medical establishment. And so today I am breaking the silence on the abuse that I have experienced in the medical industry, that it has been quite an eye-opener for me. I do believe that people who are bullies, narcissists, predators who, they seek after people who are vulnerable. I believe that they prey on those who they have a good hunch had already experienced abuse. I was already a survivor of child abuse, of statutory rape, of so many other different things that have gone on in my life. So I was easy prey for those in the medical industry. The one thing that we need to understand, and I want to end with this, If you are being bullied, sexually harassed, verbally abused, physically attacked, anything else, as in sexual assault, any form of abuse and violence in a work front position, whether it's the medical industry, whether it's the like hotel, motel, restaurants, retail, wherever it may be, whatever establishment and business it could be, there is no excuse for abuse. We must understand that it is not your fault. You did not do anything wrong. If you are being bullied and harassed, we must put all responsibility on the abusers, on the narcissist, on the predators who are harassing males and females. We have to understand that there is no gender that's exempt. Whether you're a male or you're a female, sexual harassment on the job and bullying continues. It is epidemic, and I think time's up. Time's up. When will we force these predators and these malicious people to be accountable and to take responsibility for their actions, their words, and their violence? Today, share with me. Have you ever been bullied on the job? Did you have a narcissistic boss? Did you ever get demoted? Maybe promised a promotion, but it never happened? Were you sexually assaulted or harassed on the job? If so, please share your story with me. And you could go to my website to check out everything, my blogs and various wellness tips at danaarcuri.com. Thank you and have a great day.